Okay, gang, this is part 3 in my series on how to create a butterfly and get it into Source FilmMaker. I took you through the orientation of how I'm going to refer to things in Blender in the last session, and I set up a background image here so that we can actually model from this. Now, I'm not here to teach you how to model. I'm here to actually just throw together a butterfly to show you that it can be done and get it into Source FilmMaker. So my modeling techniques might be different than yours. Don't comment on that kind of thing. You can do a model any way you want. This is how I would do it. Okay, so with that, let's get into modeling. So here's our butterfly, and the first thing I want to do is I want to have a look at the actual texture here and make sure that it is centered on the screen. The reason why I want to do that is because what we're going to do with this particular model is we're only going to model one side of it, and then we're going to use a series of mirror modifiers to create the other side. That way we only have to do half the work. So what I want to do is make sure that this axis, the y-axis, is actually cutting the line. Also, the other thing about this background image is when we look at the actual butterfly, okay, remember I told you this is forward, this is backward. So I have to actually spin this butterfly around. So I can come down here to the background image, and I can turn on a rotation of 180 degrees. So now it's facing forward, and we can see that it's not quite symmetrical on the actual axis. So what I need to do is I need to move this over just a little bit, not much, to the right of the screen. So to do that down here in the actual background images, I can move it on the X or the Y axis, and because it's a 2D picture, there's only two axes that you can use. X is left and right, Y is front and back. So I'm going to move it on the X axis. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and just pull this a little bit to the right. That's getting a little bit closer to where I want it to be, and I think that is pretty much as symmetrical as I'm going to get. I can fine-tune it a little bit more by adding 0.00 or 0.015 maybe, and that's even a little bit better. Okay, so now that I've got this symmetrically across the on the x-axis across the y, I'm looking down at it from the z. Okay, so now I can start modeling this particular model. Okay, maybe looking at this, I might want to bring it down a little bit on the y-axis as well. So holding down the Shift key, come over here, and I'm just sliding this a little bit so that the model is pretty much center. Don't know if I want to go there or not. Let's leave that at 0 just for now. Okay, so now that I'm ready to model, let's get into this. My cursor is in the center, and just to make sure, Shift S, cursor to center. And the reason why I do that is that if you just click the screen with your right mouse button, depending on how you have Blender set up, you can move that cursor anywhere you want, and to try and pinpoint it back in the center is pretty hard. So Shift S, cursor to center, and it will go back to the center location. And that's where I want to start my modeling from. First thing I'm going to create is the head, and to do that I'm going to add a sphere, so Shift A to add, and I'm going to pick up a UV sphere. And I don't need it to be as high poly as 32 segments by 16 rigs. I'm just going to change that to 16 segments, and what I'm doing here is actually changing the geometry of the sphere before I commit it. So 16 by 16. I want them divisible by 4, because if I decide that I want to try and do this thing and use multiple mirror modifiers so that I can do X, Y, and Z, I might only have to do quarter of the model instead. Okay, so from that, what I want to do is I want to align to view, maybe? No, I don't. I want to maybe rotate it on the x-axis by 90 degrees so that I have this portion of the actual sphere pointing down the y-axis. So I'm going to rotate on the x by 90, and that gives me a better rounding ability here for when I start working with the actual model. And the scale doesn't need to be this big because this is going to go in this location here. So I can scale that down before I make the commit just by using the slider. I'm going to make it probably like that. Now that I have this set up, I'm ready to start. So I'm going to take the sphere into into edit mode by pressing tab. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of all the geometry on the left side of the model. So I'm going to hit Z to go into wireframe mode, A to deselect everything, and from here I'm going to use a box select by pressing B, get in as close as I can to that center point, and pick up all the vertices on that side of the model. Press X to delete them, and I'm going to delete the vertices, and now I'm left with half that sphere. Now I don't want any mesh on the inside of this, because when we actually start adding the modifier, what's going to happen is it's going to connect to this outer ring of vertices, and you don't want to have inside mesh in this object. Notice how the background image disappeared? It's because I'm not in top or right or left or bottom or mode. So pressing 7 brings me back into top view. Now what I'm going to do while I'm in edit mode is I'm going to select everything by pressing A, and I'm going to pull all that mesh down onto the head. Now it's not quite small enough. I want to be able to actually make this thing the same size as this, but because I've deleted the sphere now, I'm kind of lost. If I use the Shift S cursor to selected method, what's going to happen is it's going to place this cursor in here, and I don't want to scale on the center of everything that's selected. So what I can do is I can either select the edge loop on the outside by using a Alt right mouse button and move it there, or what I can do is I can actually select individual vertices so that I have a center point and do it that way. I would rather use the actual edge loop. So now that I have that edge loop selected, I'm going to do a Shift S and cursor to selected, and that will put my cursor right in the center of that edge loop. Back into top view, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all that mesh, and I'm going to make sure that my pivot point is selected on the medium point or the 3D cursor, because no, not the medium point. If I do the medium point, what will happen is it will scale on this point here where the gimbal is located. what I want to do is I want to scale based on that 3D cursor where it's located. So I'm going to change the pivot point to 3D cursor, and now I'm going to scale this sphere into being the size of the actual head. So pull that down. Whoops, too much. Like that. Move it into location. And scale it. Let's see. It's not quite circular. It's not quite like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale on the y-axis. So I'm going to press S, Y. This way I'm only scaling on the y-axis. I'm going to pull that in just a tad, like that, and maybe scale it back out on the x-axis as well. So S, X. And it becomes a little bit of an oblong type structure. Not much, but it's enough. Okay, so now that I've got that done, I'm going to go back into top mode, and I'm going to continue adding more mesh. Now I'm going to make my mesh so that each element is its own separate object. And that way I don't have to worry about selecting, getting mesh selected that I don't want to select. So now I've gone back into object mode. I'm going to move my cursor back to the center because I want everything to be based off that center point. And I'm going to add, maybe a cylinder. So Shift Add, Shift A to add mesh. And we're going to grab a cylinder. Like that. Now the cylinder is looking straight at us on the Z-axis. So this one I'm going to align to view. Why didn't that work? It is aligned to view. Duh. Okay, so I'm going to do the old, let's rotate it on the x-axis by 90 degrees. There's our cylinder. I'm going to, I don't want to do any movement of this thing in object mode. I'm going to decrease the vertex count to 16 because that's what we based our head on, 16. And I'm going to scale the radius down so that it just snugs into the actual body. Kind of like that. And I'm going to, I think I'll just leave it the way it is there. And I think that looks good for now. Now I'm going to go into edit mode and I'm going to start editing this thing. So tab into edit mode. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually pull the cylinder up. And by doing this in edit mode, what happens is it leaves the origin point at the center where I want it to be. Okay, so now that I've got this in here like this, I can see that it is not quite symmetrical the way I want it to be. So I can scale this on all axis and just pull it in. I'm holding the shift key down at the same time. I'm going to pull it in and commit the change. Notice how I double clicked on the left mouse button so my cursor moved, and I'm going to put that back at center, and I'm going to pull that cylinder just a little bit. I'm holding down the shift key and grabbing that red gimbal. I'm going to pull it to the, oh, why is it doing that? There. Just pull it this way a little bit. Kind of like that. Okay, now I'm ready to start working with this cylinder. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this edge loop by holding down the Alt button and clicking on the edge loop. And I'm going to pull that back to where it starts to taper into the tail of the butterfly. And from there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it so that it comes into shape that little bit of a taper here. Okay, so what I need to do is I'm still using the 3D cursor as my pivot point, and because I'm going to scale on all axes, I'm going to do a shift, cursor to selected, and that will put me right in the dead center of that cylinder. And I might even have faces on here, and we'll take care of those faces in a minute. So back into top view, and I'm going to scale by pressing S, and I'm just going to pull that in like that. Okay, so we've got the basic shape now. I'm going to select this edge loop now, and I'm going to move my cursor to that center, so cursor to selected. And what I'm going to do with this one is I'm just going to pull it down so that it meets the end of the body, like that. And I'm going to scale that into meet up with the head. Why is that doing that? Okay, I see. We're scaling on the y-axis as well. I could have, if you don't want to scale on a particular axis, what you can do is you can hold down, you can go Shift S to scale, S to scale, and then hold down Control and press the axis you don't want to scale on, which would be the y-axis. Control Y, come on. And because we're still scaling on the 3D cursor, that's why it's pulling back up in. If I do that, do the scale, hold down Control Y, thank you, and scale. Oh, it's not doing it for me. Is it Control or Shift? Scale, Shift Y. There, Shift Y. Now I'm just scaling on that particular Z and X axis. So I want to pull that into the head like that. Okay, so now we're pretty much back to a cylinder again, right? How do we get this body shape? Well, what we're going to do now is we're going to press A so that we have nothing selected. We're going to hover over the actual cylinder, and we're going to use a Control R to add an edge loop, and use the mouse wheel to increase our count of edge loops that we're going to put in here. And I think that would be good right about there. Now, if I commit by hitting the left mouse button, what's going to happen is it's going to allow me to move these wherever I bloody well want. And thinking about that, if I had just clicked on the right mouse button, it would have put them in place where they actually spawned. But I'm going to pull these down. I'm going to edge slide them just a little bit towards the front of the model and then commit them with the left mouse button. So I've just added new geometry to the actual cylinder, And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use that geometry to scale the body. So with this particular thing, I can change my pivot point to the medium point, and that will put it in the center of the actual tube. And as you can see, I've got a little bit of an oval instead of the actual roundness, and that's because when I actually scaled this, I only scaled it on the X and the Z axis, which is kind of what I wanted to do. So now I'm going to scale this, and I'm going to scale it all the way out to the edge of the body, and I'm scaling on all three axes. I'm going to select this one now, and because I've got medium point selected, it's going to use that as my scaling point. I'm going to scale that out. And same thing here, scale that out. And as you can see, we're running into a problem where we're actually leaving the actual body behind. And that's simply due to the fact that whoever made this particular texture did not make it totally symmetrical. So I can scale that in on the X just a little bit to pull it in like that. Same thing with this one, scale on the X. And what I did there is I pressed S and then X. I'm going to scale this now on all three axes. Pull it out. Make sure I don't leave the body this time. Scale that. This one, scale. This one, scale. Like that. And now when I look at my model, what I'm ending up with is something that looks kind of like this. And you're going to say, okay, so like you said you're going to like do this in a mirror environment, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to get the body actually laid out before I got rid of my other side. So yeah, we're still going to do that. Now for the tail, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this edge loop. I'm going to press E to extrude as soon as I can see where I'm going to extrude, and I'm using my mouse wheel to move in and out on the model. I'm going to press E to extrude, and I'm going to pull that all the way up to the tip. Maybe not quite so much onto the tip, but there. And I'm going to scale that edge down onto the tail. Okay, so now we can see that we're running out of symmetry on the tail, and that's the artist's rendition of the actual butterfly. We can do one of two things. We can either tilt this off to the left a little bit, which I don't want to do, or we can adjust the actual UVs when we actually create the UVs. So to finish this off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to extrude this edge now on the Y. Pull it out. Oops, that didn't happen. Control Z. Scale. Pull it in. Now I'm going to press E to extrude it on the Y, which is already selected. Pull it out just a little bit. Scale it in. Extrude on the Y, pull it out. Scale it in. And what we're doing is we're forming the rear end of the actual tail here. Extrude, pull it out, scale it in. Too much, pull it back. probably about like that. Extrude, pull it out, scale it in, not too much, pull it in, and what we're doing is we're trying to create a nice little rounding effect here. And the way that I'm selecting these is I'm holding down the Alt and the Shift key and then pressing the right mouse button. Okay, now I still have, I think maybe we do have a face there. I want to get rid of that face. So I'm going to go into face mode. I'm going to select that face and I'm going to press X and delete the face so that I've got a hole in the back end of the butterfly. Okay, I'll select that edge loop again, which means I have to either go into edge or vertex mode. 7, extrude, pull it out on the Y, just a little bit, scale it in, like that. Still have a big gaping hole here. Extrude on Y, scale it in, pulled it up way too high. And now that I've got a smaller area here, what I'm going to do is 7, it's still a little bit big. We're just going to leave that hole there. We're going to come down here, look at the front end of the butterfly, go back into face mode, select that end face, X, delete that face, and now we've got a hole in the butterfly. Okay, 7. Just going to leave it like that for now and go back into vertex select mode, go into our wireframe view, and we're going to select the left hand side now. Box select, get in as close as I can to that particular center point, scale out, box select here. Should be able to do the whole thing now. Box select. Missed some. It's okay. Box select. And X, delete those vertices. So now I've got this happening, and for some strange reason I managed to leave a vertex behind. Just select that, hit X, delete the vertex, and away it goes. So here we now have half the body of the butterfly. Now we're going to start working on the I'll leave the antenna for last. We're going to start working on the wing. And for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back out of edit mode into object mode. And I'm going to add a plane. Shift A to add mesh, and I'm going to add a plane. Now this plane is going to be right on the actual floor of the model because the cursor is still at center. Go back into this mode, and from here what I'm going to do is come back into edit mode, and I'm going to pull that plane down so that it intersects the butterfly right about where that back wing would be. And from there I'm going to add an edge loop with Control R, and you'll notice that the edge loop will form based on the direction of the actual mesh that you're selecting. So that's where I want that edge loop. I don't want to move it anywhere yet. I'm going to press the left mouse button. Oops, sorry, it was the right mouse button. No, the left mouse button. Okay. Control R, left mouse button. I'm not going to move it. Double click on that left mouse button and it will commit the change. And from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these two vertices, hit X, and delete them. Now I'm left with just this side of the actual plane. And so from there, I'm going to take these two vertices. I'm still on the medium point as my pivot point, so it's going to select the middle of the wing. I'm going to pull them out to here, and I'm going to pull them back just a little bit, kind of like that. With these two vertices, I'm going to bring them to the edge of the body, like that. This one here I'm going to pull down and come back into body, like that. What I'm doing is I'm just kind of forming the geometry that I want on that wing. Oops, 7. Holding down the shift key in the middle mouse button. Pull that up kind of like that. Like I say, this is my modeling technique. You do it any way you want. So now that I have this laid out, I'm going to go into time-lapse and finish up on this bottom wing. Okay, that doesn't look too bad for a bottom wing. Maybe I might want to either add another edge loop in here, or yeah, I think I'll add another edge loop in here. There, that just kind of like that. And what that does is it kind of spaces the loops so that they stay pretty much square. Okay, and I'm after that actual quad effect here. I want to stay away from tries if I can possibly do that. Now I'm just fine-tuning so that my vertexes are within the actual texture. Kind of like this. And let's have a quick look at the actual geometry now. The topology. Okay, so that is like that. Come out of wireframe mode, go into solid mode, and come into object mode, and this is what I've got. Okay, now first thing I'm going to do here now is, before I go into that top wing and model out that top wing, I'm going to select these two objects, all the objects, and actually put a smooth shading on them. So now they're smooth, and I've got a cylinder type, a flattened cylinder type body with a round head. I've got a wing that is paper thin, and now I'm going to go in and model that top wing right now. So hit 7 on the numpad, and I'm going to add another plane and do exactly the same thing as I did for that bottom wing. Okay, so back into time lapse. Okay, that looks not too bad. Let's have a look in solid mode. So now I've got the actual left-hand side of the butterfly pretty much laid out the way that I want it. Control R, maybe one more right there, and we'll just round that wing out just a little bit more, like that. And maybe one here. Control R. Pull that out just a little bit. Maybe pull it over just a tad. Right about there. Now let's round it out. There. Kind of like that. You can add as much geometry as you want. This is going to be a fairly simple model, so I don't want to go overboard here. Now you saw me when I did this, selected 2 vertex points and then went cursor to selected and selection to cursor. What I'm doing is I'm trying to even out the distance between 2 vertex points. And because it is a flat plane, it should... What the heck happened there? Cursor selected, selection to cursor. Whoops, didn't want to do that. But that is a good thing I did that, because it brought up another point that I need to make. Shift, no, not Control Shift, cancel. Shift S, selection to cursor. There we go. And doing this is, once you start moving one, then you start moving a lot of them. Selection to cursor. That should be all right. We can just move that one down like that. That one along. And you can actually use an edge slide as well. Vertex slide, pull it like that. Vertex slide, and it'll just slide on that edge loop. Vertex slide, too much, probably right about, yeah, leave it like that. That's good. Vertex slide. Now if I wanted to slide the whole edge loop, I would select the edge loop and do an edge slide. Kind of like that. There, that's good. That'll do it. Okay, anyway, now that we have that wing done, I'm going to add the smooth to it, and now we've got half a butterfly with the exception of the antennas. And I'm going to do the antennas in a different way, so I'm going to end this particular portion of the video and move on to part 4. So with that, I'm going to say private jack out.